Welcome back, folks, to another episode of Charm City Heavyweights podcast, brought to you by the great folks at Great 8 Sports Memorabilia in Parkville, Maryland. I'm the host, Matt Trigger. My co-host, Josh Merrill, will be with us soon. He is enjoying family vacation right now. I've been waiting for this episode for a long time. Joining us tonight, ESPN legend, Baseball Tonight legend. He is a contributor for ESPN.com. He is a New York Times best-selling author. He has 3 published books, and he just won a very prestigious award with the Baseball Writers of America, Mr. Tim Kurkjian of ESPN. Welcome to the show, Tim.
Well, I'm happy to be here, Matt. Anytime I can talk to another guy from Baltimore, it's good enough for me.
Yes, it is. It's great to have you on the show, Tim. Just to kind of, everybody knows who you are as a baseball fan. You are an absolute legend of the game. You've been covering the sport for decades with the big 4-letter company, up north. You've been all, world traveled with baseball. You were just in Baltimore last night for the Orioles and Reds series finale. What was your experience like at the ballpark?
Well, I got a friend of mine took care of the tickets, which I don't ever do because I can get in free with my press pass. But we sat in the front row. We had the best seat in the house. I was about 40 feet from home plate. I've sat in those seats before, but only once. And it's just another reminder for all fans. The closer you can get to the field, the more you will understand the most important part of the game, and that is the speed of the game, the speed of the ball. So Felix Bautista threw 103 miles an hour last night, and I'm sitting in the first row, and I've seen 3,000 Major League games in person, and it still just amazed me how hard he throws. And this goes for a lot of other guys in the big leagues. It just amazes me that Major League hitters can hit that when somebody's throwing 103 miles an hour. He's as big as a doorway. So I had another great night at the ballpark. It's really hard not to have a great night at the ballpark, period. And when the weather is perfect like it was last night, and I am literally sitting in the best seat in the house, that's a pretty good night. And I got to see this remarkably talented Oriole team up close again. But I also saw the Reds for the first time since Ellie De La Cruz came to the big leagues. So I saw all their really good young players. And I think you could make a case. If you're going to find the 2 teams in the big leagues right now with the best set of young, exciting players, it might have been the game that I went to last night in Baltimore, the Reds and the Orioles. That was really something to watch.
Yes, and I wanted to kind of ask you about Bautista. He is a mammoth human being. He's 6'9", every bit of 260, 270 pounds. I'm not to compare him to the big unit Randy Johnson is of a huge stretch because it's apples and oranges. But for as big as he is and with as long of a stride as he has in his delivery, he's throwing 103 and the ball's coming out at essentially 51 or 52 feet after his windup and delivery. So 103's got to feel like 115.
Yeah, Sparky Anderson once told me a long time ago, there's nothing like a big pitcher. Well, this guy is beyond a big pitcher. And the danger with somebody that big is there are so many moving parts that somehow that motion might get fouled up along the way. But he's pretty compact. He threw a lot of strikes last night. And again, Major League hitters, they can time an airplane. They can time a bullet if they see enough of it. This guy has other stuff he can throw which he threw last night. And I don't care what anyone says. When you're that big and that intimidating, and every once in a while you miss the strike zone, that is not a comfortable at bat at any point. And this is why the Orioles are in such a great position right now. Not just all these good young position players, but the back end of that bullpen led by Bautista, that is a nightmare for opposing teams. And even though the Orioles gave it up last night, I'll take my chances with the 7th, 8th, and 9th inning with the Orioles.
A lot of people are, a lot of fans in Baltimore, they're happy about the back end of the bullpen. I think we're a little streaky in the middle relief. Brian Baker's a good middle reliever. CNL Perez has been struggling. Danny Colome's been hot and cold. Yanier Cano has stretches where he looks like an all-world setup man that could probably close on 15 other ball clubs, and then he has a rough patch. But Bautista is far and away, I believe, one of the best closers in baseball, and to watch him dominate the way he does is just simply incredible.
Right. And my experience, Davey Johnson, former Oriole, former Mets manager, managed a bunch of teams, has told me many times, he said, you win in the postseason with bullpen and bench. And the Orioles have a pretty talented bench right now because they got guys who won a Gold Glove last year that aren't even playing every day these days. And once they get everybody healthy, they're going to have a pretty deep team and a deep, versatile bullpen. And again, they're so young. I talked to Brandon Hyde about a week into the season, and I looked at him and I said, team's good. And he went, team's talented. He was trying to tell me there's a difference between great talent and a really good team. It takes time for that talent to meld into a team. Well, they've already done that. They just finished a 162 game stretch, which they won 98 games. I mean, that's pretty darned impressive. And I've done all the research on this, Matt. To make a big jump like they did last year, that's rare. That's unusual. But it's even more rare to make a huge jump like that and then the next year make another jump. And that's what they're on their way to doing. And that's what's so impressive about the 2023 Orioles is they're building on what they did last year. And even though everyone knows can't take this team lightly anymore, they're knocking some people around. It's been very, very impressive to watch them.
It has, and there's a split amongst the Orioles fan base. I'm along the lines of wanting us to go not necessarily all in and blow the farm up, because in past iterations of the Orioles under the previous regime, that was the status quo, and it necessarily didn't turn out in our favor because we had to go through another rebuild, which what we're technically still in now. We have a lot of prospects in waiting. We just brought up Jordan Westberg, who looks to be the part already. I know that he is not hitting home run after home run, but he's patient at the plate. He's showing poise. He makes hard contact, and he plays exceptional defense. And I think it's, going to create a situation now where we got to make some very tough decisions. We have Jackson Holliday that's a couple years out. Colton Cowser's down in the minor leagues. Heston Kjerstad. Dylan Beavers is not far off. You have Joey Ortiz at the major league level not getting reps every day. The Orioles are going to have to make some very tough decisions, and I believe that they're going to have to move some pieces now to get this going and find a formidable bat for the middle of the lineup and possibly a front end of the rotation starter. Well, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think they should do something, and I think they will do something. Earl Weaver, the great Earl Weaver, I could tell you hours and hours of stories about Earl Weaver, but he once told me, look, you got to win this year, and then you figure out next year. And now they got everyone in Baltimore excited about this team, thinking we're going to the playoffs. If you can go get a piece that can make you better for this year and get you to the playoffs, I think you have to make that move. But there are two warnings here. The way they've, the blueprint they've used for this rebuild It took a little while to figure it out, but it sure is going well now. And the last thing you want to do is take that beautiful farm system and tear into it. The second warning is I'm not sure who's going to be available out there at the trade deadline. I mean, I've talked to people every day, and some tell me this is going to be a very quiet trade deadline. Others tell me it's going to be crazy. But I found, and this is unusual, almost every team is looking for another hitter because it's so hard to hit in the big leagues these days. So when you say rightfully, correctly, they got to go get a middle of the order hitter, so do about a dozen other teams out there. And I'm telling you, Matt, there aren't a dozen middle of the order hitters that are available. So it's going to be fascinating to see what the trade deadline looks like. I think the Orioles will do something. I'm not sure it's going to be massive, but I think for the fan base and for the good of the club, if they have a chance to do something that can get them in the playoffs this year, even if you mortgage some of the future, I think you got to go for it.
Absolutely. You know, I've seen names being thrown around such as Lucas Giolito, Dylan Cease, Jordan Montgomery, Shane Bieber, Marcus Stroman. Those have been the names that have popped up in Baltimore the most. And it seems like Stroman might cost a little bit more, but he's a rental at this point because he's a free agent at the end of the year. Outside of Jackson Holiday and Grayson Rodriguez, do you make everybody else fair to acquire one of these, you know, big league certified pitchers?
Yeah, well, you're certainly not trading those guys. You're not trading Rodriguez or Holiday, that's for sure. But the other danger with this, Matt, and you're correct in naming all of those names. The problem is every one of those guys you mentioned plays in the Central, either the NL or the AL. And since those two divisions are so weak that if you're the Chicago Cubs, you simply can't trade your best pitcher, Marcus Stroman, when you're only 4 games out in the division, or even closer than that in the division, and 4 games out in the wild card. You know, you can't tell your fan base, hey, we got a shot to make the playoffs, but we're going to trade our best pitcher now. The Cardinals are in the same boat here. You know, with Jordan Montgomery, he hasn't had a great year, but, you know, Cardinals have already sold 3.2 million tickets this year. If they give up at the end of July and trade Montgomery and Paul Goldschmidt, I've heard his name, I'm not believing that for a second, that's not sending a very good message to your fan base. That's why guys have told me with an extra wild card and with the weakness in the 2 Centrals, a lot of teams who shouldn't be in it are in it. And if you make it in the playoffs in baseball, you have a chance to win. I mean, just take the White Sox. They played horribly to this point, but let's say they miraculously get hot, win the division, and now they can throw Giolito, Cease, Lance Lynn, and somebody else in the playoffs. They're going to have a chance. They can't give up on this season either. That's why the trade deadline is going to be so interesting, is exactly what teams are going to be in and out, and that those 2 Centrals are keeping a lot of teams in, which probably should be out.
Yes, and I was, you know, talking to a couple of the local radio personalities, you know, just talking about possible trade candidates that are already on the major league roster. Jorge Mateo plays excellent defense. He is a speed demon on the bases. He is not hitting his body weight in recent weeks. The power fell off from the early surge in April and early May. And Ryan Mountcastle has been the definition of inconsistent for the Baltimore Orioles for the better part of the last couple of years. He has the power, but when we moved our home run fence back 25 feet and then raised it almost triple the height it was the previous year, it's really affected his power numbers, especially in Camden Yards, because you've been covering the Orioles and Major League Baseball for the longest time. When it gets humid in the summer, the ball carries. And with the home run fence now being, you know, catering to pitchers, Mountcastle's numbers have fallen, and we have been playing Heston Kjerstad at first base in the minors on a regular basis to get him in the lineup, and he's been serviceable, if not a little bit above average, in the defensive department. would Ryan Mountcastle be a good trade piece to center for somebody such as Shane Bieber or a Marcus Stroman if the next 3 weeks are so telling to where things just go upside down? I know we have the All-Star break, so that's a 5-day period where nobody's going to be playing baseball. So is Ryan Mountcastle and Jorge Mateo guys that you attempt to move, or maybe is it a Ramon Urias, or do you look at just sticking to the minor leagues and then the minor league prospects and then just adding what you can to the major league roster that's already winning a ton of ball games?
Yeah, well, again, it all depends on who you're dealing with. For instance, you mentioned the Cubs. The Cubs need another hitter in the middle of the order. I just saw they played 2 games in England. I went to London for that series.
That's
Incredible. They are a bat short, believe me, and the Guardians are 2 bats short. So sure, they would love to add a couple position players, but again, what is the cost? And Shane Bieber would be the perfect guy to come to Baltimore. He'd also be the perfect guy to go to the Dodgers and the Cardinals and every other team that needs him. And again, why would the Guardians trade Shane Bieber? They're in first place as of today. They can't trade their best pitcher, but yet these are the names we keep hearing, and rightfully so. And that's why this is such a strange time at the trade deadline coming up. I can't tell who's going and who's staying, which is normal, but it's a little bit more complicated this year.
Yes, and the one big name that everybody keeps on talking about moving, and I heard you on 105.7 The Fan yesterday. I listened to Jason, Ken, and Tim on the way home from work every day, and Shohei Ohtani is the big name that's talked about being moved, and like you've been alluding to with the teams in the AL and NL Central, the Angels aren't out of it, and you would be crazy to trade Ohtani. But the haul that it would take to get Ohtani and the money you would have to kick out, you were predicting between $500 and $600 million because you're going to have to pay him as an ace and a middle of the order power hitter who has a capability of playing right field on the days that he doesn't pitch. So that is such a pipe dream that I've never really considered the Orioles bringing him here, because of what it would take the Orioles to bring him here. You're gutting your entire farm system and starting from scratch all over again. There's no way that we acquire Ohtani without dealing Holiday and Kowser and Grayson Rodriguez and DL Hall. It would take an exorbitant package to just make that work.
Right, and
so
that's
I've
why
maintained that
Ohtani's not coming to Baltimore, from what I could tell. And whoever trades for him at the trade deadline has to be certain that they can sign him long term, because you can't give up 5 really good young players for a 2-month rental. You can't. That's why I don't think Ohtani's going anywhere. First off, I think the Angels are better than people think. They're in the playoff race right now. I mean, they're right in the middle of it. I think they're going to get better from here. Mike Trout's a great player who's in a bit of a slide. He's going to get hot. And I think they have a chance to make the playoffs. And to me, the only way that they keep Ohtani long-term is to make the playoffs this year and prove to him we're going to make the playoffs several more times over the next 5 to 10 years. That's their best shot of keeping him, because he loves a comfortable place to play, and he's very comfortable playing in that ballpark in Anaheim. Now, the question is he going to be comfortable not making the playoffs? No, he's not. So if they can prove we have a much better team than we did last year, we're going to the playoffs this year, I think they have an outside chance to keep him. But if they try to trade him, I just don't see it happening. And yet, if they don't trade him and they lose him for a draft choice, and you lose arguably the most remarkable player in the history of the sport, that's going to be a tough thing to justify. We just lost one of the best pitchers of the game, one of the best hitters in the game, and we got a draft choice for him.
That's a definite catch-22. It's just, and I'm not going to use the word frustrating. I'm anxious as an Orioles fan because I have not been alive for a World Series. I was still 6 more years post World Series when I was born for the Baltimore Orioles. And I think that we have the tools, we have the pieces ready for a World Series run. A lot of people forget that John Means is on his way back from Tommy John surgery, and generally speaking, you don't really anticipate him to be back to form this year, even if he comes back in late July, early August. But I just want us to make a move for somebody, and not just for the sake of it, but the starting rotation has such peaks and valleys that there's no real anchor at the front of the rotation. Kyle Gibson is having a great year. He gets roughed up every couple starts, but other than that, he's an innings eater. He's consistent. Tyler Wells is having a good year. Dean Kramer has, his peaks and valleys as well, but he has a pretty solid record. And Cole Irvin is not what we thought we were acquiring from the when we traded Hernandez, but I just know that a front of the line starter puts us in the upper echelon, because in the playoffs, you're not going to see the lower echelon teams. You're going to see New York. You're going to see Tampa Bay. You're going to see Toronto. You're going to see the A's touting. I mean, the Angels, if they make it, you're going to see them touting Ohtani and Trout and Renfroe and Rendon and all those guys. So I really just think that the Orioles need to make some type of move. But like you said, who do you go to? What do you give up? Where do you go?
Yeah, by the way, I spoke to a couple of the Reds yesterday about Tyler Wells, and man, were they impressed with the way that he threw the other night. I mean, they volunteered that to me, just how precise he was with his stuff and how good his stuff is. But you're right. They need somebody at the front of rotation who can go on an enemy mound in October and go beat the Rays or go beat the Rangers or go beat the Astros. And I'm just not sure they have that guy right now. But it comes back to the question you asked 20 minutes ago. Are they going to be willing to give up their best young kids to get that starting pitcher that they need? And again, I'm not sure that starting pitcher is out there, because so many of these teams are looking and saying, why would we trade our best pitcher right now to the Orioles and make them better when our best pitcher might get us into the playoffs? And that's why this is a very interesting time of year.
It definitely is. And another thing I wanted to ask you, Tim, kind of shifting away from the playoff race and talking a little bit about the future prospects of the Orioles, just in terms of the players that they have currently in the system. Jackson Holliday can play essentially anywhere on the infield, second, short, third. He has the capability. Gunnar Henderson is an elite athlete. He can play the hot corner. He can play shortstop. Westberg can play anywhere. So barring a trade of Westberg, which I don't think that they're really going to do because they would have done it already, those three are the anchors of the infield moving forward. And first base can be Santander, for the next couple of years, or it can be somebody like Heston Kjerstad, or even talking about the youngster that just made the top 100 prospect list, Samuel Basallo. And where do these pieces fit in with the infield? If you could put your GM hat on for the Baltimore Orioles for a couple minutes, who do you play where to maximize the best all-around value for that Orioles infield for the next 10 years?
Well, everything's going to change when Jackson Holliday comes up, because he's going to be the shortstop. But what I would do for the moment is I would put everyone at a set position and say, Gunnar Henderson, you're going to play shortstop every day. And, Westberg, you're going to play second base or third base every day. And give them a little consistency as opposed to just moving them around. But it also, and Brandon Hyde was telling me last night that he's in such a good position because he's got all these young guys that can play all of these positions. And I think it's better for a young guy to know I'm playing third base every day. I don't have to come to the ballpark wondering what position I'm going to play. When you're that young, you go do whatever they tell you to do. You're just happy to be in the lineup. But I think it's just slightly better when you can put a guy there and tell him, look, this is going to be our left side of the infield for the next 10 years. And this is going to be our double play combination for the next 10 years. So you just decide where everybody fits best, and then I would leave them there. But again, you can't make that decision now, because when Jackson Holliday comes up, chances are he's going to change the outlook of the infield.
Absolutely. Holiday is on a meteoric rise right now through the Orioles farm system. We just drafted him less than a calendar year ago, and he's already in high A ball. He's hitting the cover off the ball. He has Aberdeen Ironbird Stadium essentially sold out every time he's there. And as much as Gunnar wants to play shortstop, I truly believe that he is the third baseman of the future. He has the potential that Manny Machado had. And I know that's very high praise to compare him to Manny, because Manny's the best third baseman in the game to a lot of people. But yeah, you're right. Jackson Holliday changes the entire situation when he gets here. When do you think he gets to the major league level? Do you think it's breaking spring training 2024, or do you think it's more along the lines of late 24, early 25?
I think he could open as their shortstop next year, 2024. I am a big believer, especially with what I've seen lately with Ellie De La Cruz and, O'Neill Cruz for the Pirates. If a guy's ready, he's ready. They told us Derek Jeter wasn't ready, and then he went out and had one of the best rookie years ever, and they won the World Series. They told us Nomar Garciaparra wasn't ready, and he had a stunningly great rookie year. I think if you're that good and you're ready, you can bring him to the big leagues. And I think Jackson Holliday, having grown up in a baseball family, I don't think he's going to be awed when he gets to the big leagues. Matt, when he was just a kid, maybe 3-4 years old, I covered a lot of those games, and Matt Holliday's there with his son, and he would tell his son, show us Ichiro or whoever it was. And Jackson Holliday would do the most perfect batting stance you've ever seen of these famous baseball players. And then he would swing the bat. And I kept thinking, this is amazing that a 3, 4, 5-year-old is this advanced. And he was big. He's bigger than me when he was 5 years old. It was unbelievable how skilled he was. So I'm not surprised at all that he's gotten to where he is this quickly. And like I said, you don't want to rush somebody, but we rush people all the time now. And sometimes when they get here, they are absolutely ready. I would give him a shot. And if it doesn't work right away, he fails for 40 games, and you have to send him back down, it's not going to crush him. And if it does crush him, then, maybe he's not the player you thought he was going to be anyway. So I am now a big believer in, let's get the guy to the big leagues and see what he can do. Maybe it'll work right away.
And I'm told that I'm crazy when I say that I want him to make the team out of camp next year. And a lot of people always worry about this team control thing and the arbitration years and the clock starting. And you have a limited window to win in baseball because there's so much parity, and you never know who's going to be the next hot team to rise from the basement or mediocrity. And you have Adley, you have Gunnar, you have Grayson, you have all these guys. You have Tyler Wells, you have Bautista and Cano in the bullpen. You have so many guys you can build around. Why wait to worry about an arbitration year? You're going to probably end up buying him out if he's the real deal anyway, and you're going to buy out the arbitration deals towards the end anyway. I wanted to ask you, because this has been coming up. A lot of people are high on Sam, the rookie catcher in low A ball. He just made the top 100 prospects list for a couple different lists, and they're thinking that he's going to unseat Adley Rutschman at catcher, and Adley's going to move to first base. Do you see Adley taking that path this early, or do you see that happening a little bit later down the line when he's pushing his 30s as opposed to his essential prime?
I see it happening much later down the line. Adley Rutschman is a franchise player. I was told when he was a freshman in college, he was ready to catch defensively in the big leagues as a freshman in college. That's remarkably advanced. I remember last year, Jordan Lyles told me, I can't believe how young this guy is. I can't believe how inexperienced he is. And I can't believe how good he is behind the plate. When you have somebody who can run a game like that and understand the defensive end and is a switch hitter and can produce from both sides, even though he's much better left-handed, you keep him behind the plate as long as you possibly can. Because when Joe Mauer switched from catcher to first base, those numbers didn't look quite so good at first base. But when you can get that kind of production at supposedly a non-offensive position, you keep that guy there as long as you can. And I think Adley Rutschman is going to be a major league catcher for a minimum of 10 years and maybe longer.
I agree with you. I think that if anything, if they don't use Basallo as a trade chip down the line, I think that he possibly transitions to the first base role. It's not uncommon for catchers to do that. I just think that Adley has such a great arm behind the plate. And a lot of people have been vocal recently about players, base runners of opposing teams running on him. And I think a lot of it has to do with the rule changes. Now, I could be making excuses, but the amount of times that you can throw over to first with the pitchers keeping the runners honest, and just all these different rules and the pitch clock and all that now, it seems like guys are starting to test Adley a little bit more, or maybe the base running is just getting better league wide.
Yeah, the base running has really changed. The bigger bases, the pick rule, disengagement rule, it's all changed. And now teams are saying we can get 90 feet a whole lot easier than we used to. And I watched Adley last night. He did not throw well last night. He had a very difficult night. Again, most catchers do now, but I think he's thrown out like 9 out of 51 guys this year now. That's pretty low percentage. And again, it's dependent on the pitcher's holding, bigger bases, guys are running now. But I'm not worried about him, even though he had a bad night behind the plate, throwing the ball to second base. That's going to get better. I don't worry about him defensively at all. And if you're worried about Adley Rutschman, you're worrying about the wrong thing.
Do you think that he's possibly catching too many games in a row, if that's even a thing? I know that every sport now is on either the pitch count with baseball and the minute log with NBA basketball and snap count in the NFL, and everything is so analytical. Do you think that he's, because we don't have an option right now behind him on the roster that's adequate or at least somewhat close to what he can provide, that they're just throwing him out there every night and he's experiencing a little bit of like hitting that wall before the All-Star break?
Yeah, look, you got to be careful with today's players. We protect them more and more, and I certainly understand why. Though it's a paradox. The more we protect them, the more they seem to get injured. But when you're talking about a catcher, you're talking about a franchise player, you have to make sure you don't overwork him early on in his career, because the bumps and bruises are going to come with the position that he plays, just like you better be careful, overworking a teenage pitcher, one in his, and baseball just doesn't do that anymore. We have healthy scratches now in baseball. There was no such thing like that when I first started covering late 70s, early 80s, but we're doing it now to protect our players. I certainly understand why. And yes, a day off here and there for a star catcher is a good idea. And you have the DH so you can keep his bat in the lineup.
Absolutely. I just want to, verbalize these things to somebody that's a true student of the game, such as yourself. And it's really, frustrating because, like you said, there's so many scratches that are healthy, and you don't want to run Adley down to the point where come, late August, early September, you have to start having somebody else, catch, every third day, because at the end of the day, Adley's a great defensive catcher. I know he had a bad game last night, like you alluded to, but the staff is comfortable with him. You can tell. Kramer's comfortable with him. Tyler Wells loves him. Those guys have an incredible relationship. Kyle Gibson loves him. So it's just one of those situations where do you rest him now a little bit more often and then go hard in the end of the season, or do you kind of balance that rest all the way through until the playoffs?
Yeah, it's a difficult spot, but this is, Major League Baseball has these, performance coaches who are counting literally every step that you take during a major league game. And I know there was a guy for a National League team who said, your right fielder last night hit a double and a triple. He ran an awful lot last night. He should get tonight off because he's going to be tired. Look, if I hit a double and a triple in the same game, I'm going to want to play the next day because there's a good chance I'm swinging the bat pretty well. But these performance coaches are watching everything. And that's comforting to know that somebody is not going to get overworked because they're counting everything that's being done. But like I said, you got to be exceptionally careful when you're talking about a catcher.
I agree with you. And it's important to protect the athletes anyway, because at the end of the day they're the ones that get the team to the promised land in every sport. So I wanted to ask you about the London series. I know the Orioles didn't play in the London series. Where does experiencing baseball in London rank in your professional career for you?
Well, I've seen an awful lot of stuff, but so that's not like a top 5 thing for me.
Okay.
All
Okay.
right. I mean,
Fair enough.
I've covered every World Series game since '81. I was there the night Rip Jr. played in 2-1, 3-1. I've seen some remarkable things in my time, but that was top 10 for me because my mother was born in England, so I'm going back to the country in which my mother was born and grew up. So that was kind of cool. The crowd there was tremendous. The energy in that ballpark was great. There were 54,000 people there 2 nights in a row. Wherever I went in London, there were Cub fans like all around me. Every time I looked to my right, there's a Cub fan. I looked to my left, there's a Cardinal fan. Boy, do those teams travel well. And yet I was also impressed with how much, people from the UK enjoyed baseball coming to their country. Now, I'm not suggesting it's going to replace soccer anytime soon, but it was a great festive atmosphere. I loved every second of it. Like I said, it's a top 10 memory for me in baseball, only because the players, I was really struck by how the baseball players really engaged with the history of London, which had nothing to do with baseball. They went to the Tower of London and Tower Bridge and Westminster Abbey and Buckingham Palace. And I talked to them about all of their experiences, and they became history buffs and for a few days. And I think it's really refreshing that baseball players get out away from the game once in a while. It's so damn hard to play that if you're thinking about it 24 hours a day, it's just going to eat you up because it's so hard to play. To get away from it and experience something else, see how the world works in another way, I think that was really good. And that was one of the highlights of my trip, was talking to all those guys about going to all those historic places in London.
That's an interesting, perspective on it, because a lot of fans probably think that all they do is eat, breathe, and sleep baseball, and to see those guys be tourists and get to talk to them about things that aren't baseball related, that's got to be a breath of fresh air for not only them but yourself as well. You have been covering baseball for 30 plus years, almost 40 years, and are you excited to see the game growing again with this new crop of stars that are just coming up? Because it seems like baseball goes through a lull where they have all these mega stars, and then there's a couple years where it seems to kind of fall off. But now you have Otani, you have Rutschman, you have Machado, you have I'm gonna forget a lot of guys, but you have O'Neill Cruz, you have and it's so spread out across the game that they're not all on 2 or 3 teams. Do you think that this is a good thing for the league, putting the game in the UK to expand its growth possibly over there as well?
Yeah, and to globalize the game is a good idea. But I'll tell you, Matt, the last 10 to 12 years, ever since Trout and Bryce Harper came to the big league essentially the same time, I have never seen an influx of this many good young players who are this big, this fast, this young, and this good. And they get here and they appear to be ready to play. I mean, just look, when we've talked about, we've talked about Ellie De La Cruz. We talked about Wander Franco, who just, he's a tremendous young player. Julio Rodriguez of the Mariners last year was unbelievably good, and he's enormous. So we this is a great time in baseball. And I had this exact discussion at the batting cage last night with Freddie Gonzalez and Brandon Hyde about the talent that we see on the two teams playing last night at Camden Yards. But that talent is almost everywhere that you look. Everywhere I go now, I see a new kid come up and I say, wow, this kid just came up. It's the first time I've seen him play in a major league game, and he looks ready. And they're so much bigger and stronger than they were. Again, I started covering in the late 70s, early 80s, and they didn't look like this when they came up in 1979. These guys are so big, so strong, so athletic. It's really breathtaking. Now we just have to teach them how to play the game, the finer points of the game. Base running, saw a couple cutoffs missed last night, just can't do that. But our young players today are so talented that they just overpower the game with their physical gifts. And they haven't learned yet, because they haven't been taught yet, the finer points of the game that, Cal Ripken, Robin Yount, George Brett, Paul Molitor, the guys that I grew up, Alan Trammell, watching and covering. And I'm learning so much from just the little things that they would do to help them win a ball game. And now our players don't take notice of those things too often, because they say, well, I don't have to take another step to my right because I know what pitch is coming and all that, because I'm going to get to that ball anyway because I have tremendous range. Some of them have so much information, but they just overpower the game with their physical gifts, and it is truly breathtaking to watch these young players on display today.
I agree with you, and I hope that this ignites the next generation of youth to take up baseball again, and because majority of the big stars that are in the majors, I'm gonna say more than half are of Asian or Hispanic descent, and which is there's no problem with that at all. But you just want to see America get back into the habit of getting these kids out to the game and getting their interest peaked again. And I think that we have the proper caliber of stars because there's no huge scandals surrounding any of them. We're out of the steroid era. We're out of the juice ball era. We're now in the era where, like you said, a lot of these baseball players are built like they could play defensive end in the NFL or power forward in the NBA.
Right. And you're right. We need to get more young kids interested in baseball. We need to make it more exciting. We need to make it more fun. We're in a society now with instant gratification. We want everything now. So, if you're a football player and you got a chance to play NFL quarterback or go to AA and play, in the minor leagues for 4 years, as opposed to starting as an NFL quarterback, of course you're going to take the NFL. But I think Aaron Judge really did a great service to the game. I think Aaron Judge could have played any of the three major sports on just about the highest level if he had chosen to, but he chose baseball. And I think a lot of young African-American kids look at him and say, he could play in the NFL if he chose to when he was 12, or if he chose to play in the NBA when he was 12, he might be in the NBA now, but he chose baseball, and that's a good thing for the game.
I agree. I do want to see the game flourish. It was my first love of all the sports I've ever played, and it's exciting. A lot of these wholesome characters in baseball, no matter where you look, they're out there having fun. I don't know if you got a chance to see it last night, but the center field section of Camden Yards, they have the area where they spray the fans with water, the sprinkler section, and the celebration of the Orioles with the it's essentially a beer bong, but they use Gatorade or water. A lot of these guys have home run traditions now. They had the home run chain last year here in the city. It's nice to see them having fun, and they're not taking it so seriously that it turns people away from wanting to watch.
Right. I just wrote a little piece for Baseball Tonight not long ago about all the celebrations that teams do now after a home run. Like when the Reds hit a homer, they put one of those Norse helmets on with antlers coming out of it. And whatever allows them to have a little bit of fun playing the game, I think it's good. To repeat, this is the hardest game, at least to me, in the world to play. And if you don't have a good chuckle with it once in a while, even when you fail doing it, it's going to spit you out. It's going to eat you up and spit you out. That's how hard this game is to play. And I really enjoy it when guys are laughing and smiling and playing the game. Now, there's a limit, of course. We can't be celebrating in the batter's box, throwing our arms up in the air, and the ball hits the top of the fence, and the guy ends up getting a single instead of a stand-up double or maybe even a triple because he's too busy having a good time. We do have to be careful with that. There's a fine line between having fun and not playing the game the right way.
I understand, and it's just nice to see that most guys have enough awareness to know when it's time to have fun and when it's time to reel it in. So I wanted to ask you. I had a lot of our listeners texting, messaging, and actually calling me on the phone the last couple of days, Tim. They want to know about your relationship with Scott Van Pelt. Scott's another local guy, and you guys are beloved here in Baltimore and as a whole. More so than anywhere else. I'm being biased, but you and Scott, what's the story?
Well, first off, Scott and I are from the same county. We're both from Montgomery County, Maryland. I went to Walter Johnson High School, named after the greatest pitcher of all time. He went to Sherwood, so we have that in common. We also went to the University of Maryland, not at the same time. I'm much older than him. And we have a shared love for the games. I love to watch the games, Matt. I'm not all that interested in contract numbers and talking to agents every day. I just like to go watch Gunnar Henderson hit a 3-run triple to left center field. That's what does it for me. And that's what Scott does. Scott has described ESPN, at least he did years ago. It's not quite the same anymore. He described it as the greatest sports bar in the world, except for there's no food and there's no booze, but it's where you go to watch the games. And that's what he loves. And that's what I love. And of course, he's one of the funniest people in the whole world. Everyone has somebody in their life who can make you laugh no matter what they say. Scott is kind of that way with me. And he's the master of all accents, all dialects. He can impersonate people. So years and years ago, this is just ridiculous now, but maybe even 15 years ago, he dropped a Kike Garcia on me out of the blue. And it's such a beautiful accent, and it's such a different voice than the one that we hear in Montgomery County, Maryland. And he does it so perfectly. Well, I laughed out loud. And then that just has become a bit for the last 10 or 15 years. And I'm not apologizing for that. As I've told you, we're allowed to have a good laugh once in a while, and he can get me to laugh and to smile. Look, we're covering sports for a living. And even though it's a serious job and it's people's livelihoods, if you can't laugh when you're covering baseball once in a while, you're really in a lot of trouble. And it got so bad that it wasn't that long ago. I'm walking through the grocery store, the Safeway near my house, and this total stranger, this happens all the time, just stops me in the frozen food aisle and says, he doesn't even say hello. He just says, make sure you have Scott tell you who the goalkeeper is for the Women's World Cup soccer team for the United States. So I have to think who that is, and it's Hope Solo. So, of course, I tell this to Scott on the air. He immediately recognizes
Oh.
that it's Hope Solo, and he gives me the Hope Solo name. It was just hysterically funny. And I was in line getting a sandwich not too long ago, and the guy's ordering a sub, and I'm standing right behind him. He doesn't even say hello to me. The guy says at the counter, "What kind of cheese do you want?" And he turns around and he looks me right in the eye and he goes, "Provolone," like that. And I went, "Oh my God, this is unbelievable. Everyone is in on this." And again, it's just a fun thing that Scott and I do, and we share. People seem to like it. And I repeat, I'm not going to apologize for having a hearty laugh once in a while with a dear friend when we're talking about sports.
We love it, man. There's because a lot of us have the accent. A lot of my friends that we all listen to you guys and have. I've been watching you since I was a little kid, and just to see Scott try to break you on camera as soon as he can is some of the funniest TV. Because I'm sure 99% of the people that have never been to Baltimore or Maryland probably don't understand why it's so funny. It's kind of like the Boston accent where only Boston folks really get it. So,
right. And Scott could do that Boston accent really well too. I repeat, he could do any accent, any dialect. He is very funny. He is very clever, and he knows how to make me laugh.
Without getting in trouble, you or Scott, has there ever been like a staff meeting or like a really serious thing up at ESPN where Scott busted out and gets you to start laughing in like the most opportune time, or does he just say?
No, Scott is the master of knowing the time and the place for the right thing. If he senses, and this is one of the reasons he's so good on television, is he can read the room and sense the moment that this is not the time to be messing around. Listen, it's not every time I go on with him that he drops an name on me. I've done some serious stuff with him. Guys who get suspended for steroids, people die, Hall of Famers die. You can't talk about Henry Aaron dying and then use something funny after that. You can't. Scott reads the room really, really well, but he's also so playful that he knows, all right, we've had a great time with this interview. Let's finish with something really funny. And he does. That's one of the great beauties and secrets of Scott Van Pelt.
That's a beautiful thing. I'm jealous of the friendship you guys have because that is something that is so genuine that comes through the television that often missing from a lot of television programming these days. To kind of wrap up I'm sorry, go ahead, Tim.
No, I was just saying the chemistry is really important no matter where you are, whether you're in the booth calling a game, whether you're, on the beat as a writer and you're working with the columnist. Chemistry is really important. And Scott and I have good chemistry.
Absolutely. You do 100%. Now, last year you were awarded with the Baseball Writers of America Career Excellence Award. I know that's got to be one of the most amazing moments of your life. If you could put that into words, what was that like when you found out you were going to receive that award?
Well, it was certainly the most overpowering, overwhelming, professional moment, weekend, whatever, of my entire life. And there is not a close second. The day after I won the award, Johnny Bench called me on the phone at my house. The greatest catcher of all time called me and said, "Congratulations, Tim. Welcome to the club. You're one of us now." Now, let's be clear, Matt. I'm not one of them. I'm not in their club. I'm a writer. They're the Hall of Fame players. But still, the greatest catcher of all time called me to congratulate me. And then his voice got very soft and he said, "Tim, it's moments like this that bring you back to Little League." And I was about ready to cry again. And he said, "And let's face it, Tim, you could still fit into a Little League uniform." So this is how great it was with Johnny Bench, with all the Hall of Famers. after I made my speech on the Saturday, Sunday is the real induction day for the players. And I'm on a bus going over to the induction site. And there's one seat left on the bus. And the only people on the bus are Hall of Famers. It's me and all the Hall of Famers. Like, who doesn't belong on this bus? So there's one seat open. This very regal, elegant looking gentleman looks at me and says, "Can I sit next to you?" And it was Sandy Koufax. So I sat next to Sandy Koufax for 15 minutes as we drove over to the facility. And, I've talked to Sandy many times, interviewed him before. So I wasn't completely in awe, but still pretty cool that one of the greatest pitchers of all time is sitting next to me. And we talked all the way to the stadium. It was really cool.
That's fantastic. It's so cool that you got to be amongst legends. You are a legend yourself in your field. And like you said, you're a writer, and that is not to minimize that. You have been excellent at your craft, and it's fantastic that they acknowledged you for such a long and storied career. And I know that means the world to you. Has this inspired you to possibly write another book?
I'm going to write another book. Yeah. I just don't have time right now. And I'm going to wait for the moment where it's going to hit me. All right, it's time to write another book. I've written 3. I hope to write several more, but I'm a little busy right now with work and with things at home. I'm a grandfather twice now. I'm going to be a grandfather for a 3rd time coming up. And we have some health issues in the family. So I can't take on a new project now when I'm just trying to get my work done and take care of everything at home. But I will write hopefully several more books, because there's nothing more satisfying than writing a book, having somebody actually buy it, read it, and tell you that they liked it. That's about as good as it gets for me and for any writer.
I can't wait for it. I know that it's got to be a different situation for you as opposed to being on the road and traveling all over the country, all over the world for your job. But I know that with the way that I'm not saying the way you operate, but with the amount of effort you put into everything you do, I know that you want to and be able to give it the proper time. So that's really, really nice to know that you do want to do it again, because your books have been on the New York Times bestseller. You are one of the pioneers of modern baseball writing. So it's refreshing to hear. But I've taken up an hour of your time. You've been so gracious, Tim. I want to thank you so much for coming on. Obviously, everybody knows where they can find you on their television sets, on their iPhones to read your work. Is there anything you'd like to plug or promote?
No, that's all right. I don't need to plug anything. I'm on TV all the time. I write all the time, and I'm at baseball games all the time. And I don't care how corny it sounds. There's no substitute for being at the ballpark. And, I started this in 1979, and here it is 44 years later, and I still love to go to the ballpark. And once I lose that love, which I don't think I ever will, then it'll be time to go do something else. I'm just not qualified to do anything else other than what I'm doing.
Absolutely, Tim. Thank you again. Just hang around 1 second for post show. I'm going to wrap it up. Folks, thank you so much. This episode was brought to you by the Great 8 Sports Memorabilia in Parkville, Maryland. Thank you again, Chris Ruling, for sponsoring the show. Tim, it was a pleasure, man. Just hang around for a second.